Good morning. This camera is all messed up today. We'll get it fixed though. All right. Welcome back to Lunch in the Word. Happy Monday. It's going to be another short week as we have our New Year's Day. And I want to read a verse. I've been bad about reading random verses like I should be doing. But we're going to read Psalms 65:11 this morning. You crown the year with your bounty, and your carts overflow with abundance. So keep this verse in mind as we start a new year in 2 days. Again, you crown the year with your bounty, and your carts overflow with abundance. Psalm 65:11 is a celebration of God's goodness and blessings and an invitation to experience the fullness of those blessings through a relationship with God. So carry that verse with you over the new year. Again, Psalms 65:11. And what are we doing today? 11 through 13, Leviticus. Clean and unclean food. Chapter 11. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, say to the Israelites, of all the animals that live on the land, these are the ones you may eat. You may eat any animal that has a divided hoof and that chews the cud. There are some that only chew the cud or only have a divided hoof. You must not eat them. The camel, though it chews the cud, does not have a divided hoof. It is ceremonially unclean for you. The hyrax, though it chews the cud, does not have a divided hoof. It is unclean for you. The rabbit, though it chews the cud, does not have a divided hoof. It is unclean for you. And the pig, though it has a divided hoof, does not chew the cud. It is unclean for you. You must not eat their meat or touch their carcasses. They are unclean for you. Thank God for Jesus. Of all the creatures living in the water of the seas and the streams, you may eat any that have fins and scales, but all creatures in the seas or streams that do not have fins and scales, whether among all the swarming things or among all the other living creatures in the water, you are to regard as unclean. And since you are to regard them as unclean, you must not eat their meat. You must regard their carcasses as unclean. Anything living in the water that does not have fins and scales is to be regarded as unclean by you. These are the birds you are to regard as unclean and do not eat because they are unclean: the eagle, the vulture, the black vulture, the red kite, and any kind of black kite, and any raven, the horned owl, the screech owl, the gull, and any kind of hawk, the little owl, the cormorant, the great owl, the white owl, the desert owl, the osprey, the stork, any kind of heron, and the hoopie, and the bat. That's still pretty good. All flying insects that walk on all fours are to be regarded as unclean by you. There are, however, some flying insects that walk on all fours that you may eat. Those that have jointed legs for hopping on the ground. Of those you may eat any kind of locust, katydid, cricket, or grasshopper, but all other flying insects that have 4 legs you are to regard as unclean. You will make yourselves unclean by these. Whoever touches their carcasses will be unclean until evening. Whoever picks up one of their carcasses must wash their clothes, and they will be unclean until evening. Every animal that does not have a divided hoof or that does not chew the cud is unclean for you. Whoever touches the carcasses of any of them will be unclean. Of all the animals that walk on all fours and those that walk on their paws are unclean for you. Whoever touches their carcasses will be unclean till evening. Anyone who picks up their carcasses must wash their clothes, and they will be unclean until evening. These animals are unclean for you. Of the animals that move along the ground, these are unclean for you: the weasel, the rat, any kind of great lizard, the gecko, the monitor lizard, the wall lizard, the skink, and the chameleon. Of all those that move along the ground, those are unclean for you. Whoever touches them when they are dead will be unclean until evening. When one of them dies and falls on something, the article, whatever its use, will be unclean, whether it's made of wood, cloth, hide, or sackcloth. Put it in water, It will be unclean until evening, and then it will be clean. If one of them falls into a clay pot, everything in it will be unclean, and you must break the pot. Any food you are allowed to eat that has come into contact with water from such a pot is unclean, and any liquid that is drunk from a pot is unclean. Anything that one of their carcasses falls on becomes unclean. An oven or cooking pot must be broken up. They are unclean, and you are to regard them as unclean. A spring, however, or a cistern for collecting water remains clean, but anyone who touches one of these carcasses is unclean. If a carcass falls on any seeds that are to be planted, they remain clean. But if water has been put on a seed and a carcass falls on it, that is unclean for you. If an animal that you are allowed to eat dies, anyone who touches its carcass will be unclean till evening. Anyone who eats some of its carcass must wash their hands, and they will be unclean until evening. Anyone who picks up the carcass must wash their clothes, and they will be unclean until evening. Every creature that moves along the ground is to be regarded as unclean. It is not to be eaten. You are not to eat any creature that moves along the ground, whether it moves on its belly or walks on all fours or on many feet. It is unclean. Do not defile yourselves by any of these creatures. Do not make yourselves unclean by means of them or be made unclean by them. I am the Lord your God. Consecrate yourselves and be holy, because I am holy. Do not make yourselves unclean by any creature that moves along the ground. I am the Lord who brought you up out of Egypt to be your God. Therefore be holy, because I am holy. These are the regulations concerning birds, animals, everything that moves about in the water, and every creature that moves along the ground. You must distinguish between these unclean and the clean, between living creatures that may be eaten and those that may not be eaten. Chapter 12, Purification after childbirth. The Lord said to Moses, say to the Israelites, a woman who becomes pregnant and gives birth to a son will be ceremonially unclean for 7 days, just as she is unclean during her monthly period. On the 8th day, the boy is to be circumcised. Then the woman must wait 33 days to be purified from her bleeding. She must not touch anything sacred or go to the sanctuary until the days of her purification are over. If she gives birth to a daughter for 2 weeks, the woman will be unclean, as during her period. Then she must wait 66 days to be purified from her bleeding. When the days of her purification for a son or daughter are over, she is to bring the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting a year-old lamb for a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or a dove for a sin offering. He shall offer them before the Lord to make atonement for her, and she will be ceremonially clean from her flow of blood. There are the regulations for the woman who gives birth to a boy or a girl. But if she cannot afford a lamb, she is to bring 2 doves or 2 young pigeons for a burnt offering, and the other for a sin offering. In this way, the priest will make atonement for her, and she will be clean. And chapter 13, regulations about defiling skin diseases. Chapter 13, verse 1. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when anyone has a swelling or a rash or a shiny spot on their skin that may be a defiling skin disease, they must be brought to Aaron, the priest, or one of his sons who is a priest. The priest is to examine the sore on the skin, and if the hair in the sore has turned white, the sore appears to be more than skin deep. It is a defiling skin disease. When the priest examines that person, he shall pronounce them ceremonially unclean. If the shiny spot on the skin is white, but does not appear to be more than skin deep, and the hair is not turned white, the priest is to isolate the affected person for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to examine them, and if he sees that that sore is unchanged and is not spread in the skin, he is to isolate them for another 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to examine them again, and if the sore has faded and is not spread in the skin, the priest shall pronounce them clean. It is only a rash. They must wash their clothes, and they will be clean. But if the rash does spread in their skin after they have shown themselves to the priest to be pronounced clean, they must appear before the priest again. The priest is to examine that person, and if the rash has spread in the skin, he shall pronounce them unclean. That is a defiling skin disease. When anyone has a defiling skin disease, they must be brought to the priest. The priest is to examine them, and if there is a white swelling in the skin that has turned the hair white, and there is raw flesh in the swelling, it is a chronic skin disease, and the priest shall pronounce them unclean. He is not to isolate them because they are already unclean. If the disease breaks out all over their skin, and so far from the priest can see, it covers all the skin of the affected person from head to foot, the priest is to examine them, and if the disease has covered their whole body, he shall pronounce them clean. Since it has turned white, they are clean. But whenever a raw flesh appears on them, they will be unclean. When the priest sees the raw flesh, he shall pronounce them unclean. The raw flesh is unclean, and they have a defiling disease. If the raw flesh changes and turns white, they must go to the priest. The priest is to examine them, and the sores have turned white. The priest shall pronounce the affected person clean, and they will be clean. When someone has a boil on their skin and it heals, and in the place where the boil was, a white swelling or reddish white spot appears, they must present themselves to the priest. The priest is to examine it, and if it appears to be more than skin deep, and the hair has turned it white, the priest shall pronounce that person unclean. It is a defiling skin disease, and it is broken out to where the boil was. But if the priest examines it, there is no white hair in it, and it is no more than skin deep, and it is faded, the priest is to isolate them for 7 days. If it is spreading in the skin, the priest shall pronounce them unclean. It is a defiling skin disease. But if the spot is unchanged and it is not spread, and is only a scar from the boil, and the priest shall pronounce them clean. When someone has a burn on their skin and a reddish white or white spot appears in the raw flesh of the burn, the priest is to examine the spot, and if the hair in it has turned white and it appears to be more than skin deep, it is a defiling skin disease that has broken out in the burn. The priest shall pronounce it unclean. It is a defiling skin disease. But if the priest examines it and there is no white hair in the spot, and there is no more than skin deep and has faded, then the priest is to isolate them for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to examine that person, and if it is spreading in the skin, the priest shall pronounce them unclean, if it is a defiling skin disease. If, however, the spot is unchanged and has not spread in skin, but has faded, it is swelling from the burn, and the priest shall pronounce them clean. It is only a scar from the burn. If a man or woman has a sore on their head or chin, the priest is to examine the sore. If it appears to be more than skin deep and the hair in it is yellow and thin, the priest shall pronounce them unclean. It is a defiling skin disease on the head or chin. But if, when the priest examines the sore, it does not seem to be more than skin deep, and there is no black hair on it, then the priest is to isolate the affected person for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to examine the sore, and if it is not spread and there is no yellow hair in it and does not appear to be more than skin deep, then the man or woman must shave themselves except for the affected area, and the priest is to keep them isolated for another 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to examine the sore, and if it has not spread in the skin and appears to be no more than skin deep, the priest shall pronounce them clean. They must wash their clothes, and they will be clean. But if the sore does spread in the skin after they are pronounced clean, the priest is to examine them. And if he finds that the sore has spread in the skin, he does not need to look for yellow hair. They are unclean. If, however, the sore is unchanged so far as the priest can see, and if a black hair has grown in it, the affected person is healed. They are clean, and the priest shall pronounce them clean. When a man or woman has white spots on the skin, the priest is to examine them, and if the spots are dull white, it is a harmless rash that has broken out on the skin. They are clean. A man who has lost his hair and is bald is clean. If he has lost his hair from the front of his scalp and has a bald forehead, he is clean. But if the man has a reddish white sore on his bald head or forehead and is a defiling disease breaking out on his head or forehead, the priest is to examine him. And if the swollen sore on his head or forehead is reddish white like a defiling disease, the man is diseased and is unclean. The priest shall pronounce him unclean because of the sore on his head. Anyone with such a defiling disease must wear torn clothes. Let their hair be unkempt. Cover the lower part of their face and cry out, unclean, unclean. As they have the disease, they remain unclean. They must live alone, and they must live outside of the camp. Regulations about defiling molds. 13:47, Leviticus. As for any fabric that is spoiled with a defiling mold, any woolen or linen clothing, any woven or knitted material of linen or wool, any leather of anything or anything made of leather, if the affected area in the fabric, the leather, the woven knitted material, or any leather article is greenish or reddish, it is a defiling mold and must be shown to the priest. The priest is to examine the affected area and isolate the article for 7 days. On the seventh day, he is to examine it. And if the mold has spread in the fabric or woven knitted material or the leather, whatever its use is to be it is a persistent defiling mold. The article is unclean. He must burn the fabric, the woven or knitted material of wool or linen, or any leather article that has been spoiled. Because the defiling mold is persistent, the article must be burned. But if, when the priest examines it, the mold has not spread in the fabric, the woven or knitted material, or leather article, he shall order the spoiled article be washed. Then he is to isolate it for another 7 days. After the article has been washed, the priest is to examine it again. And if the mold has not changed in its appearance, even though it is not spread, it is unclean. Burn it, no matter which side of the fabric has been spoiled. If when the priest examines it, the mold has faded after the article has been washed, he is to tear the soiled part out of the fabric, the leather, or the woven or knitted material. But if it reappears in the fabric, in the woven or knitted material, or in the leather article, it is to be spreading mold. Wherever has the mold be burned. Any fabric, woven or knitted material, or any leather article that has been washed is rid of the mold, must be washed again. Then it will be clean. These are the regulations concerning defiling molds in wooden or linen clothing, woven or knitted material, or any other leather article, for pronouncing them clean or unclean. And it was woolen, not wooden earlier. All right, y'all. So this may sound pretty tough, pretty strenuous, but remember, there's millions of people living in a desert. It's not like they have neighborhoods and doctor's offices and ERs they can go to. So remember that they are in the wilderness. 3 million people with no modern health care. Okay, so remember that as we read things like this, and you may think that it's silly or it's nothing that we would do today because of a spot on your hand. Go be confined for a week to 2 weeks to forever. Remember that. Father, we thank you for another day. We thank you for Monday. We thank you for a good weekend. We just ask you to bless us this week. Lord, be with us and guide us. Guide our thoughts, guide our speech, guide our actions. Lord, let us approach this new year with thankfulness, and let us go into this new year with you on our hearts and in our minds. Let us reach people, Lord. Let us be disciples. We pray in Jesus' perfect name. Amen. All right, y'all. One more time, I'm going to read Psalm 65:11. You crown the year with your bounty, and your hearts overflow with abundance. Psalm 65:11 is a celebration of God's goodness and blessings, and an invitation to experience the fullness of those blessings through a relationship with God. All right, y'all, have a wonderful day. We'll be here tomorrow for New Year's Eve, and then New Year's Day, I will be at my brother's, and we won't be here New Year's Day. So enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll be back tomorrow. Love you.